May 17, 2026. Three stories broke in the same 24 hours. Three stories that, taken together, tell you exactly where this world is heading. In Moscow, Ukraine launched its largest drone assault on the Russian capital region since the war began. Microchip factories, oil refineries, pipeline pumping stations, all hit in a single night. 90 miles from Florida, classified U.S. intelligence revealed Cuba has acquired more than 300 military drones from Russia and Iran, and has begun discussing plans to attack American targets. And in Jerusalem, Prime Minister Netanyahu convened an emergency security cabinet. He had just spoken with Trump. The topic, whether to resume strikes on Iran. 3 theaters, 3 escalations, one night. Today we are going through all of it. The weapons Ukraine revealed, the Cuba intelligence that could become a pretext for U.S. military action, and what Netanyahu and Trump discussed that sent Israel's security cabinet into emergency session. I'm Grant Williams. This is the Williams Perspective. If you're new here, hit subscribe. Every story today is sourced directly from Ukraine's general staff, classified U.S. intelligence reported by Axios, and confirmed statements from the offices of Netanyahu and Trump. Let's start in Moscow. Because what happened on the night of May 16th into May 17th was not a routine drone attack. It was a strategic disclosure, Ukraine showing the world and Russia exactly what it has built. First, the context that made this strike inevitable. On May 14th and 15th, Russia launched a massive aerial assault on Ukraine. A Russian Kate-101 cruise missile struck a 9-story apartment building in Kyiv's Darnitsia district. 24 people were killed. Among them were children and teenagers. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed the missile that destroyed that building had been manufactured in the second quarter of 2026, meaning Russia was still producing precision weapons with components that Western sanctions were supposed to block. Zelensky said plainly, sanctions must be more painful for Russia. 2 days later, Ukraine demonstrated exactly what that meant. On the night of May 16th into the early hours of May 17th, the Ukrainian Security Service and Defense Forces launched coordinated strikes against targets in the Moscow region. Russian monitoring channels initially tracked up to 300 drones in motion. Moscow's air defense, described by analysts as the most heavily protected airspace in Russia, ringed by approximately 130 air defense positions and 89 confirmed Pantsir S-1 systems within a 50-kilometer radius of the capital, went to full activation. Russia's defense ministry claimed it intercepted between 550 and 556 Ukrainian drones overnight. But here is the question Ukraine's general staff has been content to let hang in the air. If more than 500 drones were intercepted, how do you explain what burned? The Moscow Oil Refinery in the Kapotnya district, a facility inside the Russian capital itself, previously considered untouchable, caught fire. 12 workers were injured. The Solnechnogorskaya oil pumping and loading station, located approximately 40 kilometers northwest of Moscow, was struck. This is not an ordinary fuel depot. It is a critical node in the Ring Oil Products pipeline encircling Moscow, the pipeline that supplies gasoline and diesel to Russia's military logistics chain. The massive RVS 5000 fuel storage tanks ignited. The Volodarsko oil pumping station in Konstantinovo, approximately 22 kilometers from Moscow, was also hit. And then there was the target that Ukraine's security service described as the primary objective of the entire operation. The Angstrem plant in Zelenograd. Zelenograd is sometimes called Russia's Silicon Valley, a planned electronics hub built northwest of Moscow during the Soviet era. The Angstrem facility is one of Russia's principal semiconductor manufacturers. It produces discrete transistors, microcontrollers, microprocessors, the microchips that go into Russia's precision-guided missiles, cruise missiles, drone guidance systems, advanced optics. The facility has been under U.S. sanctions since 2022. A fire was confirmed at the site. Ukraine's general staff then did something significant. It named the weapons used. The RS-1 BARS, a jet-powered Ukrainian-built drone with composite materials construction and high-speed penetration capability. The FP-1 Firepoint, an upgraded variant designed to carry air defense payloads. And the BARS-SM Gladiator, a system whose specifications Ukraine has not fully disclosed. These are not imported weapons. These are domestically developed Ukrainian systems, built inside Ukraine under conditions of active war, despite ongoing Russian strikes on Ukrainian industrial facilities. Ukraine's commander of Unmanned Systems Forces, Robert Brody, released a statement that left no room for interpretation. He described the operation as proof that war is returning to where it came from. Then he posted a photograph. A kamikaze drone bearing an inscription that read, "Moscow will never sleep again." That is not a military communique. That is a strategic message, delivered directly to the Russian public. And the Russian public received it clearly. In the Moscow suburbs, in Zelenograd, in Khimki, in Mytishchi, residents reported explosions without any warning sirens. No SMS alerts. Emergency service lines were jammed. Local telegram channels filled with a single question: why aren't the sirens sounding? The Russian authorities' silence on that question is its own kind of answer. Now, what does this strike actually change on the battlefield? The Angstrem facility produces the microelectronics that go into the guidance systems of Russia's precision weapons. Semiconductor manufacturing lines are extraordinarily sensitive. Fire, vibration, dust, any of these can cause damage that takes months to repair under normal conditions. Under Western sanctions, with no access to replacement equipment from global suppliers, the repair timeline could be significantly longer. Russia is still building missiles with components that sanctions are supposed to block. Ukraine just struck one of the facilities that makes those components. The message, directed as much at Western capitals as at Moscow, was unmistakable. If sanctions cannot close the pipeline, Ukrainian drones will. Now let's talk about the story that dropped on the same day, and that has received far less attention than it deserves. On May 17th, Axios published a report based on classified U.S. intelligence shared with them by a senior Trump administration official. The intelligence assessment: Cuba has acquired more than 300 military drones from Russia and Iran since 2023. Cuban military officials have begun discussing plans to use them against the U.S. naval base at Guantanamo Bay, U.S. military vessels in the Caribbean, and potentially Key West, Florida, located 90 miles north of Havana. Let me put 90 miles in context. The distance from Washington, D.C. to Philadelphia is approximately 140 miles. 90 miles is closer than most Americans drive to visit family on a holiday weekend. At the speeds modern attack drones travel, 90 miles is not a buffer. It is a front yard. According to the intelligence, Cuba has been stockpiling these drones, of what officials described as varying capabilities, in strategic locations across the island since 2023. Within the past month, Cuban officials requested additional drones and military equipment from Moscow. Intelligence intercepts showed Cuban intelligence operatives actively studying how Iran has resisted U.S. military pressure during Operation Epic Fury. That detail is the most significant one in the entire report. Cuba is not simply accumulating weapons. It is reverse engineering Iran's tactical playbook, learning how a smaller military can use cheap, mass-produced drones to impose costs on a vastly superior force. The connection between Cuba and the Iran war runs deeper than tactics. U.S. officials estimate that as many as 5,000 Cuban soldiers have fought for Russia in its invasion of Ukraine. Moscow has reportedly paid the Cuban government approximately $25,000 per soldier deployed. Those Cuban soldiers returned with something more valuable than money. They returned with direct experience of how drone warfare operates at scale in a modern conflict. They saw how Iran's Shahed-136 kamikaze drones were integrated into Russian tactics in Ukraine. They understand the operational logic of drone swarms. A senior U.S. official described the situation to Axios with a phrase that deserves to be heard carefully. They said, "They are part of the Putin meat grinder. They are learning about Iranian tactics. It is something we have to plan for." CIA Director Ratcliffe traveled to Havana on Thursday, 2 days before the Axios report was published, and delivered what was described as a blunt warning to Cuban officials against engaging in hostilities. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, in congressional testimony this week, confirmed his concern about the presence of foreign adversary espionage infrastructure in Cuba, specifically Russian and Chinese signals intelligence facilities on the island. The Axios report acknowledged something that deserves equal weight alongside the alarm. The senior U.S. official was explicit. The intelligence could become a pretext for U.S. military action. Those are not the words of an objective assessment. Those are the words of someone who understands that classified intelligence, selectively shared with a news outlet, serves a political and strategic purpose. Cuba's Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez posted a response on social media, accusing the U.S. of fabricating a case to justify eventual military aggression and condemning what he called fraudulent pretexts. What is not in dispute is the strategic geography. Cuba hosts Russian and Chinese signals intelligence facilities. It sits 90 miles from the continental United States. It has received weapons, money, and soldiers from Russia. Its military is studying Iranian drone tactics, and the U.S. government has now made that intelligence public, with an explicit acknowledgement that it could justify military action. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 remains the closest the United States and Soviet Union came to nuclear war. The current situation does not approach that threshold. A senior U.S. official was clear that no one is worried about Cuban fighter jets because it is not even certain Cuba has one that can fly. But the presence of 300 drones, Iranian military advisors, and Russian intelligence infrastructure on an island 90 miles from Florida is not a situation any U.S. military planner is comfortable with. On the same day Ukraine struck Moscow and Axios published the Cuba intelligence, something happened in Jerusalem that may ultimately matter more than either. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke with President Donald Trump by phone. His office confirmed the call. Hebrew media reported the two leaders discussed the possibility of renewing military strikes on Iran. Netanyahu then convened what is described as a small security cabinet, a closed meeting of his most senior ministers. Foreign Minister Gideon Saar, Defense Minister Israel Katz, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, Shas Chairman Aryeh Deri. These are not routine security consultations. This is the inner circle that authorizes military action. Earlier in the day, before his call with Trump, Netanyahu addressed Israel's weekly cabinet meeting. He said, "Our eyes are open regarding Iran." He said he would hear impressions from Trump's China trip and other things. Then he added, "Certainly there are many possibilities, and we are prepared for every scenario." That language, prepared for every scenario, is not rhetorical. It is operational. Trump, for his part, had already signaled his own thinking before the Netanyahu call. On May 16th, the day after returning from Beijing, he posted an AI-generated image on Truth Social. It showed Trump and a U.S. Navy admiral standing in front of stormy waters, with several ships in the background, one flying an Iranian flag. The caption read, "It was the calm before the storm." Then on May 18th, in a phone call with Channel 12 and Axios, Trump said the following about Iran, and I'm drawing carefully from the reported quotes. He said, "We want to make a deal. They are not where we want them to be. They will have to get there or they will be hit badly, and they don't want that." On Truth Social, he was more direct. He wrote that for Iran, the clock is ticking, and they better hurry up and do it fast, or there will be nothing left. He used capital letters. Time is of the essence. The New York Times reported this week that the United States and Israel have already intensified preparations for a new wave of strikes against Iran. The scenario under consideration, more severe bombing of military targets and key infrastructure if Trump decides to break the diplomatic deadlock through military force. Iran's armed forces spokesman Abolfazl Shakarchi issued a warning in response. He told Trump not to restart attacks. Here is what the full picture looks like from a strategic standpoint. Trump returned from Beijing without the Iran breakthrough he needed. Xi gave a verbal assurance not to arm Iran, an assurance that does not appear in China's official summit documents. Iran rejected its latest U.S. proposal because it did not provide sufficient guarantees on the nuclear question. The fragile ceasefire that has been in place since late April is under visible strain. And now, the same week Trump returns from Beijing, Netanyahu convenes an emergency security cabinet to discuss resuming strikes. Trump posts storm imagery on social media, and Axios reports that U.S.-Israeli military preparations have intensified. The Iran war is not over. The ceasefire is fragile. And the diplomatic window, the 30-day deadline Iran set for itself in its May 4th proposal, is closing. These three stories, Moscow burning, Cuba arming, Iran's clock ticking, are not separate events. They are three visible nodes of the same network. Russia supplied Cuba with drones and soldiers. Iran supplied Cuba with military advisors and weapons technology. Russia shared satellite imagery and drone components with Iran. Iran exported its drone doctrine to Cuba through Cuban soldiers who fought in Ukraine. China provided Iran with reconnaissance satellites that enabled precision strikes on U.S. bases. This is a network of states and proxy relationships that has been assembling for years, and that the United States is now confronting simultaneously in multiple theaters, with military stockpiles that a Center for Strategic and International Studies report this week assessed as significantly depleted after 2.5 months of the Iran campaign. Ukraine's strike on the Angstrem plant is a direct message to this network. The weapons pipeline can be disrupted at the source, not just at the point of use. The Cuba intelligence disclosure, made deliberately public by a senior Trump administration official, with an explicit acknowledgement that it could justify military action, is a message to Havana, and through Havana to Moscow and Tehran. The United States is watching and is prepared to act in its own hemisphere. And the Netanyahu-Trump call, the security cabinet, the social media post with storm imagery. These are a message to Tehran that the military option has not been closed, regardless of what happened or did not happen in Beijing. The common thread in all three stories is this: the period of strategic ambiguity in which multiple parties could simultaneously claim to be pursuing peace while preparing for the next escalation appears to be ending. Ukraine has named its weapons and struck Moscow's defense industrial base. The United States has made Cuba's drone acquisition public and sent its CIA director to deliver an ultimatum. Trump has told Iran the clock is ticking, posted storm imagery, and his military has intensified strike preparations with Israel. These are not the actions of parties that believe the current situation will resolve quietly. Let's bring this into focus. On May 17, 2026, one day, three things happened. Ukraine launched its largest drone assault on the Moscow region since the war began, striking Russia's Silicon Valley microchip plant, its capital's oil refinery, and the pipeline pumping stations feeding the Russian military. Ukraine named the weapons it used. 3 domestically built systems the world had not previously seen at this scale. Classified U.S. intelligence revealed Cuba has stockpiled more than 300 Russian and Iranian drones 90 miles from Florida, with Cuban officials studying Iranian drone tactics and discussing plans to attack American military targets. And Netanyahu convened an emergency security cabinet after speaking with Trump about the possibility of resuming strikes on Iran, while Trump told the world on social media it was the calm before the storm. These events share a single underlying reality: the assumption that has held since late April that a ceasefire in Iran buys space for diplomacy, that the Russia-Ukraine war is contained, that the network of adversary relationships is manageable, is being stress-tested on multiple fronts simultaneously. The question I want to leave you with is this: the United States is currently managing an active war with Iran, a war in Ukraine that has now reached Moscow's doorstep, a Cuba situation that its own officials describe as a potential pretext for military action, and a summit with China that produced no binding commitments. Are these manageable in parallel? Or is the accumulation of simultaneous pressures on military stockpiles, on diplomatic bandwidth, on domestic political tolerance beginning to exceed what any single administration can sustain? That question does not have a clean answer today. But the events of May 17th suggest the answer is coming faster than most people expected. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. This has been the Williams Perspective. I'm Grant Williams.